I am Lady Rain, and this is the Reader's Nook. Welcome. We are reading The Stand. We are on chapter 6. We have been introduced to Stu and his gang, Franny, and Larry so far. Oh, and Norm. So, if you are sometimes like me and you don't have a big imagination for people until you actually see an example, then look up The Stand, and it gives you a couple different ideas of what they might look like. And I'm looking for the movie and I'm not finding it. When did that get made? The movie was made way before the miniseries, and I'm kidding, it's the miniseries, really? Are you serious? What is his name? Okay, my brain is giving me a brain fart. Who was the guy that played Lieutenant Dan?
I don't
on
know.
Forrest
I haven't
Gump.
Seen the movie.
On Forrest Gump.
I haven't seen the movie since I was a kid.
Oh, man.
Like, single digit.
You're supposed to know that stuff. Gary Sinise.
Who?
Gary Sinise.
Don't know who that is. Are you streaming right now?
Yeah.
Huh. The Stand. You ever
Gary
see
Sinise,
the prequel?
This guy?
Did you ever see the prequel?
What prequel?
The Sit.
Ha 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 ha.
What about the sequel?
Really?
The Jump.
Wow, really? You are just too funny. Wow. Yes, that is my son, the smartass.
I don't want to spoil.
Don't.
Wait, are you reading The Dark Tower yet?
No.
I heard a rumor that Randall Flagg appears in The Dark Tower.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. From what I understand, he does. There's the 94 miniseries with Gary Sinise, and there's also a TV miniseries with Whoopi Goldberg, excuse me. And so if you want, if you don't have the imagination like I don't to think of what people look like, there's ideas. The difference between the 94 with Gary Sinise and Molly Ringwald and the book is that an example, Franny's hair is longer. Franny has very short hair in the miniseries. Her hair is down her back in the book. So, anywho, again, wow, we are really starting our morning with a goofball. All right. I should put something here so that, my book isn't going to... I don't have to hold it up all day. But I don't have anything, so that's okay. All right. Wait, there was the sit, the stand, and the what?
The Jump.
Oh, I was going to say the lie down.
Oh, that's the prequel to the Sit.
Okay.
The prequel to the Sit. The Sleep.
Sleep, sit, stand, jump, huh?
It's slightly connected to Dr. Sleep.
God. Y'all, he's hilarious, I'm telling you. All right. Shall we continue? Chapter 6. Ew. It was late afternoon when Franny went out back where her
91%.
father...
91%.
Can I? Yes. That's what I make hand sanitizer with.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
I thought usually it's like 40 or something.
No, that's what gets rid of germs.
Wait, no, I'm thinking of hydrogen peroxide.
Oh, good Lord.
Hydrogen peroxide is massively diluted because hydrogen peroxide is an acid.
Okay. I'm going to read now. Where her father was patiently weeding the peas and the beans. She had been a late child, and he was in his 60s now. His white hair coming out from under the baseball cap he always wore. Her mother was in Portland shopping for white gloves. Granny's best childhood friend, Amy Lauder, is getting married early next month. She looked down at her father's back for a peaceful moment, just loving him. At this time of day, the light took a special quality that she loved, a timeless quality that belonged only to that most fleeting Maine genus, early summer. She could think of that particular tone of light in the middle of January, and it would make her heart ache fiercely. The light of early summer afternoon, as it slipped toward dark, had so many good things wrapped up in it. Baseball at the Little League Park, where Fred had always played third and batted cleanup. Watermelon, first corn, iced tea in chilled glasses. Childhood. Granny cleared her throat a little. Need a hand? He turned and grinned. Hello, Fran. Caught me digging, didn't you? I guess I did. Is your mother back yet? He frowned vaguely, and then his face cleared. No. That's right. She just went, didn't she? Sure. Pitch in a hand if you want to. Just don't forget to wash up afterward. A lady's hands proclaim her habits, Fran mocked lightly and snorted. Peter tried to look disapproving and did a poor job of it. She got down in the row next to him and began to weed. Sparrows were twittering, and there was a constant hum of traffic on US 1. Less than a block from here. Excuse me. It hadn't reached the volume it would in July, when there would be a fatal car accident nearly every day between here and Kittery, but it was building. Peter told her about his day, and she responded with the right questions, nodding in places. Intent on his work, he didn't see her nods, but the corner of his eye could catch her shadow nodding. He was a machinist in a large Sanford auto parts firm, the largest auto firm north of Boston. He was 64 and about to start on his last year of work before retirement. Yes, it used to be 65. A short year at that, because he had 4 weeks vacation still stockpiled, which he planned to take in September after the idiots went home. The retirement was much on his mind. He was trying not to look at it as a never-ending vacation. He told her he had enough friends in retirement now who had brought back the news that it wasn't all that at all. It wasn't like that at all. He didn't think he would be as bored as Harlan Enders or as shamefully poor as the Karons. The Carones. There was poor Paul, hardly ever missed a day in the shop in his life, and yet he and his wife had been forced to sell their home and move in with their daughter and her husband. Peter Goldsmith hadn't been content with Social Security. He had never trusted it. Even in his days before the system began to break down under recession, inflation, and the steadily increasing number of people on the books. There hadn't been many Democrats in Maine during the 30s and 40s, he told his listening daughter. But her grandfather had been one, and her grandfather had, by God, made one out of her father. The Ogunquit's palmist days. That had made the Goldsmiths pariahs of the kind. Pariahs of a kind. But his father had had one saying as rock-ribbed as the stoniest Maine Republican's philosophy. Put not your trust in the princes of the world, for they will frig thee up, and so shalt their governments, even unto the end of the earth. Franny laughed. She loved it when her father talked this way. It wasn't a way he talked often, because the woman that was his wife and her mother would and had all but cut the tongue out of his head with the acid which could flow so quickly and freely from her own. You had to trust yourself, he continued, and let the princes of this world get along as best they could with the people who had elected them. Most times that wasn't very well, but that was okay. They deserved each other. Hard cash is the answer, he told Franny. Will Rogers said it was land, because that's the only thing they're not making any more of. But the same goes for gold and silver. A man who loves money is a bastard, someone to be hated. A man who can't take care of it is a fool. You don't hate him, but you gotta pity him. Rand wondered if he was thinking of poor Paul Caron, who had been his friend.
Wearing scrubs.
Yes, I noticed.
Yeah, I found him in a basket.
Yeah, possibly. Who had been his friend since before Fran herself was born and decided not to ask. At any rate, she didn't need him to tell her that he had socked away enough in the good years to keep them rolling. What he did tell her was that she had never been a burden to them, in good times or in bad, and he was proud to tell his friends he had sent her through school. What his money and her brains hadn't been able to take care of, he told them, she had done the old-fashioned way, by bending her back and shucking her buns. Working and working hard, if you wanted to cut through the country bullshit. Her mother didn't always understand that. Changes had come for women, whether the women always liked them or not, and it was hard for Carla to get it through her head that Fran wasn't down there at UNH husband hunting. She sees Amy Lauder getting married, Peter said, and she thinks, that should be my Fran. Amy's pretty, but when you put my Fran beside her, Amy Lauder looks like an old dish with a crack in it. Your mother has been using the old yardsticks all her life. She can't change now. So, if you and her scrape together a bit and make some sparks from time to time, like steel against flint, that's why. No one is to blame. But you have to remember, Fran, she's too old to change, but you are getting old enough to understand that. From this, he rambled back to his job again, telling her about how one of his coworkers had almost lost his thumb in a small press because his mind was down at the pool hall while his damn thumb was under the stamp. Good thing Lester Crawley had pulled him away in time, but he added, someday Lester Crawley wouldn't be there. He sighed as if remembering he wouldn't be either, then brightened and began telling her about an idea he'd had for a car antenna concealed in the hood ornament. His voice switched from topic to topic, mellow and soothing. Their shadows grew longer, moving up the rows before them. She was lulled by it, as she always had been. She had come here to tell something, but since earliest childhood, she had often come to tell and stayed to listen. He didn't bore her. So far as she knew, he didn't bore anyone, except possibly her mother. He was a storyteller, and a good one. She became aware that he had stopped talking. He was sitting on the rock at the end of the row, tamping his pipe and looking at her. So what's on your mind, Franny? She looked at him dumbly for a moment, not sure how she should proceed. She had come out here to tell him, and now she wasn't sure if she could. The silence hung between them, growing longer, and at last, it was the gulf she couldn't stand. She jumped. Or it was the gulf she couldn't stand. She jumped. I'm pregnant, she said simply. He stopped filling his pipe and just looked at her. Pregnant, he said, as if he had never heard the word before. Then he said, "Oh, Franny, is it a joke? Or a game?" "No, Daddy. You better come over here and sit with me." Obediently, she came up the row and sat next to him. There was a rock wall that divided their land from the town common next door. Beyond the rock wall was a tangled, sweet-smelling hedge that had long ago run wild in the most amiable way. Her head was pounding, and she felt a little sick to her stomach. "For sure?" he asked her. "For sure," she said. And then there was no artifice in it, not a not a trace. She simply couldn't help it. She began to cry in great, braying sobs. He held her with one arm for what seemed to be a very long time. When her tears began to taper off, she forced herself to ask the question that troubled her the most. "Daddy, you still like me?" "What?" He looked at her puzzled. "Yes, I still like you fine, Franny." That made her cry again, but this time he let her tend herself while he got his pipe going. Borkum Riff began to ride slowly off on the faint breeze. "Are you disappointed?" she asked. "Well, I don't know. I never had a pregnant daughter before, and I'm not sure just how I should take it." "Was it that Jess?" She nodded. "You told him?" She nodded again. "And what did he say?" "He said he would marry me or pay for an abortion." "Married your abortion?" Peter Goldsmith said, and drew on his pipe. "He's a regular two-gun Sam." She looked down at her hands, displayed on her jeans. There was dirt in the small creases of the knuckles and dirt under the nails. A lady's hands proclaim her habits. The mental mother spoke up. "The pregnant daughter. I'll have to resign my membership at the church." The lady's hands. Her father said, "I don't want to get any more personal than I have to, but were you being careful?" "I had birth control pills," he said. "They didn't work." "Then I can't put any blame unless it's on both of you," he said, looking at her closely. "And I can't do that, Franny. I can't lay blame. 64 has a way of forgetting what 21 was like. So we won't talk about blame." She felt a great relief come over her. It was a little like swooning. "Your mother will have plenty to say about blame," he said, "and I won't stop her, but I won't be with her. Do you understand that?" She nodded. Her father never tried to oppose her mother anymore, not out loud. There was that acid tongue of hers. When she was opposed, it sometimes got out of control. He had out of control, he had told Fran once. And when it was out of control, she just might take a notion to cut anyone with it and think of sorry too late to do the wounded much good. Franny had an idea that her father might have faced a choice many years ago: continue opposition resulting in divorce, or surrender. He had chosen the latter, but on his own terms. She asked quietly, "Are you sure you can't stay out of this one?" "Or you can stay out of this one, Daddy?" "You're asking me to take your part?" "I don't know." "What are you going to do about it? With Mom?" "No, with you, Franny." "I don't know. Marry him?" "Two can live as cheap as one. That's what they say, anyway." "I don't think I can do that. I think I've fallen out of love with him, if I was ever in." The baby? His pipe was drawing well now, and the smoke was sweet on the summer air. Shadows were gathering in the garden's hollows, and the crickets were beginning to hum. "No, the baby isn't the reason why. It was happening anyway. Jess is," she trailed off, trying to put her finger on what was wrong with Jess. The thing that could be overlooked by the rush the baby was putting on her, the rush to decide or get out from under the threatening shadow of her mother. Oh, decide and get out from under the threatening shadow of her mother, who was now at the shopping mall buying gloves for a wedding of Fran's childhood friend. The thing that could be buried now, but would nonetheless rest unquiet for 6 months, 16 months, or 26, only to rise finally from its grave and attack them both. Marry in haste, repent in leisure, one of her mother's favorite sayings. He's weak, she said. I can't explain it better than that. You don't really trust him to do right by you, do you, Franny? No, she said, thinking that her father had just gotten closer to the root of it than she had. She didn't trust Jess, who came from money and wore blue cambray work shirts. Jess means well. He wants to do the right thing. He really does, but we went to the poetry reading 2 semesters ago. It was given by a man named Ted Enslin. The place was packed. Everyone was listening very solemnly, very carefully, so as not to miss a word, and me, you know me. He put a comfortable arm around her and said, Granny got the giggles. Yeah, that's right. I guess you know me pretty well. I know a little, he said. The giggles, I mean, just came out of nowhere. I kept thinking, the scruffy man. We all came to listen to the scruffy man. It had a beat like a song you might hear on the radio, and I got the giggles. I didn't mean to. It really didn't have anything to do with Mr. Enslin's poetry. It was pretty good. Or even with the way he looked. It was the way they were looking at him. She glanced at her father to see how he was taking this. He simply nodded for her to go on. Anyway, I had to get out of there. I mean, I really had to. And Jess was furious with me. I'm sure he had a right to be mad. It was a childish thing to do, a childish way to feel, I'm sure. But that's the way I often am. Not always. I can get a job done. Yes, you can. But sometimes King Laugh knocks, and you're the one of those people who can't keep him out, Peter said. I guess I must be. Anyway, Jess isn't one of those people, and if we were married, he'd keep coming home to an unwanted guest that I had let in. Not every day, but often enough to make him mad. Then I'd try and then I guess you'd be unhappy, Peter said, hugging her tightly against his side. I guess I would, she said. Don't let your mother change her mind then. She closed her eyes, her relief even greater this time. He had understood, by some miracle. What do you think of me getting an abortion? She asked her after a while. My guess is that's really what you wanted to talk about. She looked at him startled. He looked back, half quizzical, half smiling, one bushy eyebrow, the left cocked. Yet the overall impression she took from him was not of great gravity. Maybe that's true, she said slowly. Listen, he said, and then fell paradoxically silent. But she was listening. She heard a sparrow, crickets, the far high hum of a plane, someone calling for Jackie to come on in now, a power mower, the car with the glass pack muffler accelerating down US 1. She was just about to ask him if he was all right when he took her hand and spoke. Franny, you have no business having such an old man for a father, but I can't help it. I never married until 56. He looked at her thoughtfully in the dusk light. Carla is different in those days. She was, hellfire. She was young herself, for one thing. She didn't change until her brother Freddie died. Until then, she was young. She stopped growing after Freddie died. You mustn't think I'm talking against your mother, Franny, even if it sounds like I am. But it seems to me that Carla stopped growing after Fred died. She slapped 3 coats of lacquer and one of quick dry cement on her way of looking at things and called it good. Now she's like a guard in a museum, and if she sees anyone tampering with the ideas on display there, she gives them a lot of look out below. But she wasn't always like that. You'll just have to take my word for it. But she wasn't. What was she like, Daddy? Why? He looked vaguely out across the garden. She was a lot like you, Franny. She got the giggles. We used to go down to Boston and see the Red Sox play, and during the 7th inning stretch, she'd go out with me to the concession and have a beer. Mama, drank beer. Yes, she did. And she'd spend most of the ninth in the ladies and come out cussing me for making her miss the best part of the game when all the time it was she telling me to go down to the concession stand and get 'em. Granny tried to imagine her mother with a cup of Narragansett, Narragansett beer in one hand, looking at her father and laughing. Like a girl on a date, she simply couldn't do it. She never kindled, he said, bemused. We went to the doctor, she and I, to see which of us was wrong. The doctor said neither one. Then in 60, there came your brother Fred. She just about loved that boy to death, Fran. Fred was her father's name, you know. She had a miscarriage in 65, and we both figured that was the end of it. Then you came along in 69, a month early, but just fine. And I just about loved you to death. We each had one of our own, but she lost hers. He fell silent, brooding. Fred Goldsmith had died in 73. He had been 13, Franny 4. The man who hit Fred had been drunk. He had a long list of traffic violations, including speeding, driving so as to endanger, driving under the influence. Fred had lived 7 days. I think abortion's too clean a name for it, Peter Goldsmith said. His lips moved slowly over each word, as if they pained him. I think it's infanticide. Pure and simple. I'm sorry to say so. To be so inflexible, said. Whatever it is I'm being. About something which now you have to consider. If only because the law says you may consider it. I told you I was an old man. You're not old, Daddy, she murmured. I am, he said roughly. He looked suddenly distraught. I'm an old man trying to give a young daughter advice, and it's like a monkey trying to teach table manners to a bear. A drunk driver took my son's life 17 years ago, and my wife has never been the same since. I've always seen the question of abortion in terms of Fred. I seem to be helpless to see it any other way, just as helpless as you were to stop your giggles when they came on you at that poetry reading, Franny. Your mother would argue against it for all the standard reasons. Mortality, she'd say. Morality, she'd say. A morality that goes back 2,000 years. The right to life. All our Western morality is based on that idea. I've read the philosophers. I range up and down them like a housewife with a divided check in the Sears and Roebuck store. Your mother sticks with the Reader's Digest, but it's me that ends up arguing from feeling, and her from the codes of morality. I just see Fred. He was destroyed inside. There was no chance for him. These right-to-life biddies hold up their pictures of babies drowned in salt and arms and legs scrapped out onto a steel table. So what? The end of life is never pretty. I just see Fred laying in that bed for 7 days. Everything that was ruined, pasted over with bandages. Life is cheap. Abortion makes it cheaper. I read more than she does. She is the one who ends up making more sense on this one. What we do, what we think, those things are so often based on arbitrary judgments. When they are right, I can't get over that. It's like a block in my throat, how all logic seems to proceed from irrationality, from faith. I'm not making much sense, am I? I don't want an abortion, she said quietly, for my own reasons. What are they? The baby is partly me, she said, lifting her chin slightly. If that's ego, I don't care. Will you give it up, Franny? I don't know. You want to? No, I want to keep it. He was silent. She thought she felt his disapproval. You're thinking of school, aren't you? She asked. No, he said, standing up. He put his hands on the small of her back and grimaced pleasurably as his spine cracked. Oh, he put his hands on the small of his back and grimaced pleasurably as his spine cracked. I was thinking we've talked enough and that you don't have to make that decision just yet. Mom's home, she said. She turned to follow her gaze as the station wagon turned into the drive, the chronic winking in the day's last light. The chrome. Wow, chronic and chrome. I don't know how I did that. Hi. The chrome winking in the day's last light. Carla saw them, beeped the horn, and waved cheerily. I have to tell her, Franny said. Yes, but give it a day or two, Franny. All right. She helped him pick up the gardening tools, and then they walked up toward the station wagon together. Chapter 7. In the dim light that comes over the land just after sunset, but before true dark, during one of those very few moments that movie makers call the magic hour, Vic Helfroy rose out of green delirium to brief lucidity. I'm dying, he thought, and the words clanged strangely through his mind, making him believe he had spoken aloud, although he had not. He gazed around himself and saw a hospital bed, now cranked up to keep his lungs from drowning in themselves. He had been tightly secured with brass laundry pins, and the sides of the bed were up. Been thrashing some, I guess, he thought with faint amusement, and kicking up Dickens. And belatedly, where am I? There was a bib around his neck, and the bib was covered with clots of phlegm. His head ached. Queer thoughts danced in and out of his mind, and he knew he had been delirious, and would be again. He was sick, and this was not a cure, or the beginning of one, but only a brief respite. He put the inside of his right wrist against his forehead and pulled it away, with a wince, the way you pulled your hand off a hot stove, burning up all right, and full of tubes. 2 small, clear plastic ones were coming out of his nose. Another one snaked out from under the hospital sheet to a bottle on the floor. He surely knew where the other end of that one was connected. 2 bottles hung suspended from the rack beside the bed, a tube coming from one and then joining to make a Y that ended by going into his arm just below the elbow, an IV feed. You'd think that would be enough, he thought, but there were wires on him as well, attached to his scalp and chest and left arm. One seemed to be plastered to his son of a bitchin' belly button, and to cap it all off, he was pretty sure something was jammed up his ass. What in God's name could that be? Shit radar? Hey! He had intended a resonant, indignant shout. What he produced was a humble whisper of a very sick man. It came out surrounded on all sides by phlegm, on which he seemed to be choking. Mama, did George put the horse in? That was delirium talking. An irrational thought, zooming boldly across the field of more irrational cogitation like a meteor. All the same, it almost fooled him for a second. He wasn't going to be up for long. The thought filled him with panic, looking at the scrawny sticks of his arms. He guessed he had lost as much as 30 pounds, and there hadn't been all that much of him to start with. This whatever it was going to kill him. The idea that he might die babbling insanities and inanities like a senile old man terrified him. Georgie's gone courting Norma Willis. You get that horse yourself. You get that horse your own self, Vic, and put his nose bag on like a good boy. Ain't my job, Victor. You love your mama now. I do, but it ain't. You got to love your mama now. Mama's got the flu. No, you don't, Mama. You got TB. It's the TB. It's gonna kill you. In 1947, and George is going to die just just about 6 days after he gets to Korea. Time enough for just one letter. And then bang, bang, bang. George's. Vic, you help me now and put that horse in. And that is my last word on it. I'm the one with the flu, not her, he whispered, surfacing again. It's me. He was looking at the door and thinking it was a damn funny door, even for a hospital. It was round at the corners, outlined with pop rivets, and a lower jamb was set 6 inches or more from the tiled floor. Even a jack-leg carpenter like Vic Pelfrey could. Give me the funnies, Vic. You had 'em long enough. Mama, he took my funnies. Give 'em back. Give 'em back! Build better than that. It was steel. Something in the thought drove a nail deep into his brain, and Vic struggled to sit up so he could see the door better. Yes, it was. It definitely was. A steel door. Why was he in a hospital behind a steel door? What had happened? Was he really dying? Had he best be thinking of just how he was going to meet his God? God? What had happened? He tried desperately to pierce the hanging gray fog, and only voices came through, far away. Voices he could not put names against. Now what I say is this. They just gotta say, fuck this inflation shit. Better turn off your pumps, Hap. Hap? Bill Hapscomb? Who was he? I know that name. Holy moly, they're dead, okay? Give me your hand and I'll put you up out of here. I'll pull you up out of here. Give me the funnies, Vic. You had... At that moment, the sun sank far enough below the horizon to cause a light-activated circuit. And in this case, an absence of light-activated circuit to kick in. The lights went on in Vic's room. As the room lit up, he saw the rows of faces observing him solemnly from behind 2 layers of glass, and he screamed. At first thinking these were the people who had been holding conversations in his mind. One of the figures, a man in doctor's whites, was gesturing urgently to someone outside Vic's field of vision, but Vic was already over his scare. He was too weak to stay scared long. But the sudden fright that had come with a slight boom of light and his vision of staring faces, like a jury of ghosts in their hospital whites, had cleared away some of the blockage in his mind, and he knew where he was. Atlanta, Georgia. They had come and taken him away, him and Hap, Norm, Norm's wife, and Norm's kids. They had taken Hank Carmichael, Stu Redman. God alone knew how many others. Vic had been scared and indignant. Sure, he had the snuffles and sneezes, but he surely wasn't coming down with cholera or whatever it was that poor man Campion and his family had had. He'd been running a low-grade fever, too, and he remembered that Norm Brewitt had stumbled, needed help getting up the steps to the plane. His wife had been scared, crying, and little Bobby Brewitt had been crying, too, crying and coughing, a raspy, croupy cough. The plane had been at the small landing strip outside of Braintree. But to get beyond the Arnett town limits, they had to pass a roadblock on US 93, and men had been stringing barbed wire right into the desert. A red light flashed over the strange door. There was a hissing sound, a sound like a pump running. When it kicked off, the door opened. The man who came in was dressed in a huge white pressure suit with a transparent plate face. Wow. Face plate. Behind the faceplate, the man's head bobbed like a balloon enclosed in a capsule. There were pressure tanks on his back, and when he spoke, his voice was metallic and clipped, devoid of all human quality. It might have been a voice coming from one of those video games Like the one that said, "Try again, Space Cadet," when you fucked up your last go. It rasped. "How are you feeling, Mr. Pelfroy?" But Vic couldn't answer. Vic had gone back down into the green depths. It was his mama he saw behind the faceplate of the white suit. Mama had been dressed in white when Papa took him and George to see her for the last time in the sanitarium. She had to go to the sanitarium so everybody else in the family wouldn't catch what she had. TB was catching. You could die. He talked to his mama, said he would be good and put in the horse, told her Georgie had taken the funnies, asked her if she felt better, asked her if she thought she would be home soon, and the man in the white suit gave him a shot, and he sank deeper, and his words became incoherent. The man in the white suit glanced back at the faces behind the glass wall and shook his head. He clicked an intercom switch inside his helmet with his chin and said, "This one doesn't work. We'll lose him by midnight." For Vic Pelfroy, magic hour was over. "Just roll up your sleeve, Mr. Redmond," the pretty nurse with the dark hair said. "This won't take a minute." She was holding the blood pressure cuff in two gloved hands. Behind the plastic mask, she was smiling as if they shared an amusing secret. "No," Stu said. The smile faltered a little. "It's only your blood pressure. It won't take a minute." "No. Doctor's orders," she said, becoming businesslike. "Please. If it's doctor's orders, let me talk to the doctor. I'm afraid he's busy right now. If you'll just—" "I'll wait," Stu said equably. "Hi, thank you," said equably, making no move to unbutton the cuff of his shirt sleeve. "This is only my job. You don't want me to get in trouble, do you?" This time she gave him a charming wave smile. "If you'll only let me—" "I won't," Stu said. "Go back and tell them. They'll send somebody." Looking troubled, the nurse went across the steel door and turned the square key in the lock plate. The pump kicked on. The door swooshed open, and she stepped through. As it closed, she gave Stu a final reproaching look. Stu gazed back blandly. When the door was closed, he got up and went restlessly to the window, double-paned glass and barred on the outside. But it was full dark now, and there was nothing to see. He went back and sat down. He was wearing faded jeans and a checked shirt, and his brown boots with the stitching beginning to bulge up the sides. He ran a hand up the side of his face and winced disapprovingly at the prickle. They wouldn't let him shave, and he haired up fast. He had no objection to the tests themselves. What he objected to was being kept in the dark, kept scared. He wasn't sick, at least not yet, but scared plenty. There was some sort of snow job going on here, and he wasn't going to be a party to it any more until somebody told him something about what had happened in Arnett, and what that fellow Campion had to do with it. At least, then, he could base his fears on something solid. They had expected him to ask before now. He would read it in their eyes. He could read it in their eyes. They had certain ways of keeping things from you in hospitals. 4 years ago, his wife had died of cancer at the age of 27. It had started in her womb and then just raced up through her like wildfire. And Stu had observed the way they got around her questions, either by changing the subject or giving her information in large, technical lumps. He didn't see, so he simply hadn't asked, and he could see it had worried them. Now it was time to ask, and he would get some answers in words of one syllable. He could fill in some of the blank spots on his own. Campion and his wife and child had something pretty bad. It hit you like a flu or summer cold. Only it kept on getting worse, presumably until you choked to death on your own snot or until the fever burned you down. It was highly contagious. They had come and got him on the afternoon of the 17th, 2 days ago. 4 army men and a doctor, polite but firm. There was no question of declining. All 4 of the army men had been wearing sidearms, and when Stu Redmond started being seriously scared. There had been a regular caravan going out of Arnett and over to the airstrip in Braintree. Stu had been riding with Vic Pelfrey, Hap, and the Bruits, Hank Carmichael and his wife, and 2 Army non-coms. They were all crammed into an Army station wagon, and the Army guys wouldn't say nay, or maybe, no matter how hysterical Leela Bruitt got. The other wagons were crammed too. Stu hadn't seen all the people in them, but he had seen all 5 of the Hodges family, and Chris Ortega, brother of Carlos, volunteer ambulance driver. Chris was the bartender down at the Indian Head. He had seen Parker Nason and his wife, the elderly people from the trailer park near Stu's house. Stu guessed that they had netted up everyone who had been in the gas station and everyone that the people from the gas station said they'd talked to since camping crashed into the pumps. At the town limits, there had been 2 olive green trucks blocking the road. Stu guessed the other roads going into Arnett were most likely blocked off too. They were stringing barbed wire, and when they had the town fenced off, they would probably post sentries. And so it was serious, deadly serious. He sat patiently in the chair by the hospital bed. He sat patiently in the chair by the hospital bed he hadn't had to use, waiting for a nurse to bring someone. The first someone who would most likely be no one. Maybe by morning they would finally send in a someone who would have enough authority to tell him the things he needed to know. He could wait. Patience had always been Stu Redmond's strong suit. For something to do, he began to tick over the conditions of the people who had ridden to the airstrip with him. Norm had been the only obvious sick one, coughing, bringing up phlegm, feverish. There he goes. The rest seemed to be suffering to a greater or lesser degree from the common cold. Luke Bruitt was sneezing. Leela Bruitt and Vic Pelfrey had mild coughs. Hap had the sniffles and kept blowing his nose. They hadn't sounded much different from the first, second-grade classes Stu remembered attending as a little boy, when at least 2/3 of the kids present seemed to have some kind of a bug. But the thing that scared him most of all, and maybe it was only coincidence, was what had happened just as they turned onto the airstrip. The Army driver had let out 3 sudden bellowing sneezes, probably just coincidence. June was a bad time in East Central Texas for people with allergies. Or maybe the driver was just coming down with a common garden variety cold instead of the weird shit the rest of them had. Stu wanted to believe that, because something that could jump from one person to another that quickly. Their Army escort had boarded the plane with them. They rode stolidly, refusing to answer any questions except as to their destination. They were going to Atlanta. They would be told more there. A bold-faced lie. Beyond that, the Army men refused to say. Hap had been sitting next to Stu on the flight, and he was pretty well sloshed. The plane was Army too, strictly functional, but the booze and the food had been first-class airline stuff. Of course, instead of being served by a pretty stewardess, a plank-faced sergeant took your order. But if you could overlook that, you could get along pretty well. Even Leela Bruitt had calmed down with a couple of grasshoppers in her. Hap leaned close, bathing Stu in a warm mist of Scotch fumes. This is pretty funny bunch of old boys, Stuart. Ain't one of 'em under 50, nor one with a wedding ring. Career boys, low rank. About half an hour before they touched down, Norm Brewitt had some kind of fainting spell, and Leela began to scream. Two of the hard-faced stewards bundled Norm into a blanket and brought him around in fairly short order. Leela, no longer calm, continued to scream. After a while, she threw up her grasshoppers and the chicken salad sandwich she had eaten. Two of the good old boys went expressionlessly about the job of cleaning it up. "What is all this?" Leela screamed. "What's going on with my man? Are we going to die? Are my babies going to die?" She had one baby in their headlock under each arm, their heads digging into her plentiful breasts. Luke and Bobby looked frightened and uncomfortable and rather embarrassed at the fuss she was making. "Why won't somebody answer me? Isn't this America? Can't somebody shut her up?" Chris Ortega had grumbled from the back of the plane. "Christly woman's worse'n a jukebox with a broken record in it." One of the army men had forced a glass of milk on her, and Leela did shut up. She spent the rest of the ride looking out the window at the countryside passing far below and humming. Stu guessed there had been more than milk in that glass. When they touched down, there had been 4 Cadillac limousines waiting for them. The Arnett folks got into 3 of them. The army escort had gotten into the 4th. Stu guessed that those good old boys, with no wedding rings, or close relatives probably, were now somewhere right in this building. The red light went on over his door, and when the compressor or pump or whatever it was had stopped, a man in one of the white spacesuits stepped through. Dr. Denninger. He was young. He had black hair, olive skin, sharp features, and a mealy mouth. "Patty Greer says you gave her some trouble," Denninger's chest speaker said as he clopped over to Stu. "She's quite upset." "No need for her to be," Stu said easily. It was hard to sound easy, but he felt it was important to hide the fear from this man. Denninger looked and acted like a kind of man who would ride his help and bully-rag them around, but look up to his superiors like an egg-suck dog. That kind of man could be pushed a ways if he thought you held the whip hand. But if he smelled fear on you, he would hand you the same old cake. A thin icing of "I'm sorry, I can't tell you more" on top, and a lot of contempt for stupid civilians who wanted to know more than what was good for them underneath. "I want some answers," Stu said. "I'm sorry, but if you want me to cooperate, you give me some answers. In time, you will be. I can make it hard for you." "We know that," Denninger said peevishly. "I simply don't have the authority to tell you anything, Mr. Redman. I know very little myself." "I guess you've been testing my blood. All those needles." "That's right," Denninger said wearily. "What for?" "Once more, Mr. Redman, I can't tell you what I don't know." The peevish tone was back again. Stu was inclined to believe him. He was nothing but a glorified technician on this job, and he didn't like it much. "They put my hometown under quarantine. I know nothing about that either." But Denninger cut his eyes away from Stu, and this time Stu thought he was lying. "How come I haven't seen anything about it?" He pointed to the TV, set bolted on the wall. "I beg your pardon?" "When they roadblock off a town and put barbed wire around it, it's news," Stu said. "Mr. Redman, if you'll only let Patty take your blood pressure—" "Nope. If you want any more from me, you better send 2 big strong men to get it. And no matter how many you send, I'm gonna try and rip some holes in those germ suits. They don't look all that strong, you know it." He made a playful grab for Denninger's suit, and Denninger skipped backward and nearly fell over. The speaker of his intercom emitted a terrified squawk, and there was a stir behind the double glass. "I guess you could feed me something in my food and knock me out. But they'd mix up your test. That would mix up your test, wouldn't it? Mr. Redmond, you're not being reasonable. The manager was keeping a prudent distance away. Your lack of cooperation may do your country a grave disservice. Do you understand me? Nope, Sue said. Right now it looks to me like it's my country doing me a grave disservice. It's got me locked up in a hospital room in Georgia with a buttermouth little pissant doctor who doesn't know shit from Shinola. Get your ass out of here and send somebody in to talk to me, or send enough boys to take what you need by force. I'll fight 'em. You can count on that. He sat perfectly still in his chair after Denninger left. The nurse didn't come back. Two strong orderlies did not appear to take his blood pressure by force. Now that he thought about it, he supposed that even such a small thing as a blood pressure reading wouldn't be much good if obtained under duress. For the time being, they were leaving him to simmer in his own juices. He got up and turned on the TV and watched it unseeingly. His fear was big inside him, a runaway elephant. For 2 days, he had been waiting to start sneezing, coughing, hawking, black phlegm, and spitting it into the commode. He wondered about the others, people he had known all his life. He wondered if any of them were as bad off as Campion had been. He thought of the dead woman and her baby in that old Chevy, and he kept seeing Leila Brewitt's face on the woman, and the little Cheryl Hodges' face on the baby. The TV squawked and crackled. His heart beat slowly in his chest, faintly. He could hear the sound of the air purifier sighing air into the room. He felt his fear twisting and turning inside him, beneath his poker face. Sometimes it was big and panicky, trampling everything, the elephant. Sometimes it was small and gnawing, ripping with sharp teeth, the rat. It was always with him. But it was 40 hours before they sent him a man who would talk. Chapter 8. I need a drink. I was drinking and I looked up at my grandma's picture. You know, in all my growing up, I don't remember anybody having bookshelves of books. All my parents, all my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, either side. I remember Reader's Digest and those like monthly they were like little booklets, but they were quite thick. And they talked about like hunting. They were hunting things. EA puts them out. And the Reader's Digest, we used to go through and look for the jokes and the funnies. But I don't remember anybody having books. The only book that was in my house was either from the library, which I didn't do often. I read from the library. Or my Bible. I remember one of the ladies from church that I loved dearly. I haven't seen in years. She had a bookshelf of books. One was my favorite Bible that it was colored, all kinds of different colors. It was called a Rainbow Bible. Anyway, I was just thinking, I have all these books. I have a bookshelf over there, half of a shelf over there, like part of a shelf, because it's like this cabinet and it's got shelves and it's got a door. And so I got like 2 or 3 shelves of books over there, plus these books. Plus more upstairs. I got kids' books upstairs. But it dawned on me, I don't remember anybody having Books. Huh. I have no idea how I became such an interest in books. Now, when my mom, my dad, stepdad, and her came across books after books after books, especially you want to find books, look for auctions. Those are wonderful places to find books. Anyway, I got caught up in thinking about that. That's all. But yeah, let's move on. Sometimes I get off track. My brain goes, yep, the other way. So, shall we continue? And I remember that scene. That was a very funny scene. It gets funnier later on. Chapter 8. On June 18th, 5 hours after he had talked to his cousin Bill Hopscomb, Joe Bob Brentwood pulled down a speeder on Texas Highway 40, about 25 miles east of Arnett. The speeder was Harry Trent of Braintree, an insurance man. He had been doing 65 miles per hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. Joe Bob gave him a speeding ticket. Trent accepted it humbly, then amused Joe Bob by trying to sell him insurance on his house and his life. Joe Bob felt fine. Dying was the last thing on his mind. Nonetheless, he was already a sick man. He had gotten more than gas at Bill Hopscombe's Texaco, and he gave Harry Trent more than a speeding summons. So if you remember earlier, a few days after Joe Bob was at the Texaco, he was taken in. So this is how things are transmitting. This is what they're explaining. So now that the speeder, he's going to pass it on. Do you see what I mean? So it gets around pretty fast. Harry, a gregarious man who liked his job, passed the sickness to more than 40 people during that day and the next. How many those 40 passed it to is impossible to say. You might as well ask how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. If you were to make a conservative estimate of 5 apiece, you have 200. Using the same conservative formula, one could say those 200 went on to infect 1,000, 1,000, 5,000, the 5,000, 25,000. Under the California desert, and subsidized by the taxpayers' money, someone had finally invented a chain letter that really worked. A very lethal chain letter. On June 19th, the day Larry Underwood came home to New York, and the day that Franny Goldsmith told her father about her impending little stranger, Harry Trent stopped at an East Texas cafe called Babe's Quick Eat for lunch. He had the cheeseburger platter and a piece of Babe's delicious strawberry pie for dessert. Oh, that sounds so good. I haven't had strawberry pie in a long time. You ever had rhubarb pie? My grandma, my great-grandma, she used to make that because she grew rhubarb. It's a funny taste, but yeah. Anyway, I told you I make comments throughout the entire book. I cry, I laugh, you name it. He had a slight cold, an allergy cold maybe, and he kept sneezing and having to spit. In the course of the meal, he infected Babe, the dishwasher, 2 truckers in the corner booth, the man who came in to deliver bread, the man who came in to change the records on the juke. He left the sweet thing that waited his table a $1 tip that was crawling with death. On his way out, a station wagon pulled in. There was a roof rack on top, and the wagon was piled high with kids and luggage. The wagon had New York plates, and the driver, who rolled down his window to ask Harry how to get to US 21, going north, had a New York accent. Harry gave the New Yorker fellow very clear directions on how to get to Highway 21. He also served the man and his entire family with death warrants without even knowing. The New Yorker was Eddie M. Norris, lieutenant of police, detective squad in the Big Apple's 87th precinct. This was his first real vacation in 5 years. He and his family had had a fine time. The kids had been in 7th heaven at Disney World in Orlando. and not knowing the whole family would be dead by the 2nd of July, Nora's planned to tell that sour son of a bitch, Steve Carella, that it was possible to take your wife and kids someplace by car and have a good time. Steve, he would say, you may be a fine detective, but a man who can't police his own family ain't worth a piss hole drilled in a snowbank. The Norris family had a quick eat at Babe's, then followed Harry Trent's admirable directions to US 21. Ed and his wife Trish marveled over Southern hospitality while the 3 kids collared in the back seat. Christ only knew, Ed thought, what Corella's pair of monsters would have been up to. That night they stayed in a Eustis, Oklahoma travel court. Ed, if they were going to New York, why'd they go to Florida and into Oklahoma? Anyway, that night they stayed in a Eustis, Oklahoma travel court. Ed and Trish infected the clerk. The kids, Marcia, Stanley, and Hector, infected the kids they played with on the tourist court's playground. Kids bound for West Texas, Alabama, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Trish infected the 2 women who were washing clothes at the laundromat 2 blocks away. Ed, on his way down the motel corridor to get some ice, infected a fellow he passed in the hallway. Everybody got into the act. Trish woke Ed up in the early morning hours to tell him that Heck, the baby, was sick. He had an ugly, rasping cough and was running a fever. It sounded to her like the croup. Ed Norris groaned and told her to give the kids some aspirin. If the kids' goddamn croup could only have held off another 4 or 5 days, he could have had it in his very own house, and Ned would have left with the memory of a perfect vacation, not to mention the anticipation of all that gloating he planned to do. He could hear the poor kid through the connecting door, hacking away like a hound dog. Trish expected that Hector's symptoms would abate in the morning. Croup was a lying down sickness. By noon of the 20th, she admitted to herself that it wasn't happening. The aspirin wasn't controlling the fever. Poor Heck was just glass-eyed with it. His cough had taken on a booming note she didn't like, and his respirations sounded labored and phlegmy. Whatever it was, Marcia seemed to be coming down with it too. Trish had a nasty little tickle in the back of her own throat that was making her cough, although so far it was only a light cough. She could smother in a little hanky. Yes, I keep pulling my shirt down. I don't like things up against my neck. We've got to get Heck to the doctor, she said finally. Ed pulled into the service station and checked the map, paperclip to the station wagon's sun visor. They were in Hammer Crossing, Kansas. I don't know, he said. Maybe we can at least find a doctor who'll give us a referral. He sighed and ran an aggravated hand through his hair. Hammer Crossing, Kansas. Jesus. Why'd he have to get sick enough to need a doctor at some goddamn nothing place like this? Marcia, who was looking at the map over her father's shoulder, said, It says Jesse James robbed the bank here, Daddy, twice. Fuck Jesse James, Ed grumped. Ed! Trish cried. Sorry, he said, not feeling sorry in the least. He drove on. After 6 calls, during each of which Ed Norris carefully held his temper with both hands, he finally found a doctor in Polliston who would look at Hector if they could get him there by 3. Polliston was off their route, 20 miles west of Hammer Crossing, and now the important thing was Hector. Ed was getting very worried about him. He'd never seen the kid with so little oomph in him. They were waiting in the outer office of Dr. Brenton Sweeney's by 2 in the afternoon. By then, Ed was sneezing too. Sweeney's waiting room was full. They didn't get in to see the doctor until nearly 4 o'clock. Trish couldn't rouse Heck to more than a sludgy semi-consciousness, and she felt feverish herself. Only Stan Norris, age 9, still felt good enough to fidget. During their wait in Sweeney's office, they communicated the sickness, which would soon be known across the disintegrating country as Captain Trips, to more than 25 people, including a matronly woman who just came in to pay her bill before going on to pass the disease to her entire bridge club. This matronly woman was Mrs. Robert Bradford, Sarah Bradford to the bridge club, Cookie to her husband and close friends. Sarah played well that night, probably because her partner was Angela Dupre, her best friend. They seemed to enjoy a happy kind of telepathy. They won all three rubbers resoundingly, making a grand slam during the last. For Sarah, the only fly in the ointment was that she seemed to be coming down with a slight cold. It wasn't fair, arriving so soon on the heels of the last one. She and Angela went out for a quick drink in the cocktail bar after the party broke up at 10. Angela was in no hurry to get home. It was David's turn to have the weekly poker game at their house, and she just wouldn't be able to sleep with all the noise going on, unless she had a little self-prescribed sedative first, which in her case would be two slow gin fizzes. Sarah had a Ward 8, and the two women rehashed the bridge game. In the meantime, they managed to infect everyone in the Pauliston cocktail bar, including two young men drinking beer nearby. They were on their way to California, just as Larry Underwood and his friend Rudy Schwartz had once gone, to seek their fortunes. A friend of theirs had promised them jobs with a moving company. The next day they headed west, spreading the disease as they went. Chain letters don't work. It's a known fact. The $1 million or so you are promised if you'll just send one single dollar to the name on the top of the list, add yours to the bottom, and then send the letter on to 5 friends, never arrives. This one, the Captain Trips chain letter, worked very well. The pyramid was indeed being built, not from the top up, or from the bottom up, but from the tip down. Said tip being a deceased Army security guard named Charles Campion. All the chickens were coming home to roost, only instead of the mailman bringing some participant bale after bale of letters, each containing a single dollar bill, Captain Trips brought bales of bedrooms with a body or two in each one, and trenches and dead pits, and finally bodies slung into the ocean on each coast, and into quarries, and into the foundations of unfinished houses. And in the end, of course, the bodies were brought where they fell. Sarah Bradford and Angela Dupre walked back to their parked cars together, infecting 4 or 5 people they met on the street, then pecked cheeks and went their separate ways. Sarah went home to infect her husband and his 5 poker buddies and her teenage daughter, Samantha. Unknown to her parents, Samantha was terribly afraid she had caught a dose of the clap from her boyfriend. As a matter of fact, she had. As a further matter of fact, she had nothing to worry about. Next to what her mother had given her, a good working dose of the clap was every bit as serious as a little eczema on the eyebrows. The next day, Samantha would go on to infect everybody in the swimming pool, in the Pauliston YMCA, and so on. Give me just a few minutes. I need to let the puppy out, and then we will continue. So give me just a sec. Actually, give me a few minutes. Get up, get a drink, stretch your legs, smoke, eat, whatever. Give me 4 minutes. Oh, okay. Hey, Miss Phoebe, would you like to go out? Outside. Come down. Good girl. No, don't get up there. fine. I'm not gonna argue. Nope, nope, nope. Not gonna argue. You want the bottle? You go get the bottle. At least it'll keep you from chewing on something else. All right. Chapter 9. They set on him sometime after dark while he was walking up the shoulder of U.S. Route 27, which is called Main Street a mile back, where it passed through town. A mile or two further on, he had been planning to turn west on 63, which would have taken him to the turnpike and the start of his long trip north. His senses had been dulled, maybe, by the 2 beers he had just downed, but he had known something was wrong. He was just getting around to remembering the 4 or 5 heavy-set townies down at the far end of the bar when they broke cover and ran at him. Nick put up the best fight he could, decking one of them and bloodying another's nose, breaking it too by the sound. For 1 or 2 hopeful moments, he thought there was actually a chance that he might win. The fact that he fought without making any sound at all was unnerving them a little. They were soft. Maybe they had done this before with no trouble. And they certainly hadn't expected a serious fight from the skinny kid with a knapsack. Then one of them caught him just over the chin and shredding his lower lip with some sort of school ring, and the warm waste of water gushed into his mouth. Did I say water? The warm taste of blood gushed into his mouth. He stumbled backward and someone pinned his arms. He struggled wildly and got one free hand just as the fist looped down into his face like a runaway moon. Before it closed his right eye, he saw the ring again, glittering dully in the starlight. He saw stars and felt his consciousness start to diffuse, drifting away into parts unknown. Scared, he struggled harder. The man wearing the ring was back in front of him now, and Nick, afraid of being cut again, kicked him in the belly. School Ring's breath went out of him, and he doubled over, making a series of breathless, woofing sounds, like a terrier with laryngitis. The others closed in. To Nick, they were only shapes now. Beefy men, good old boys, they called themselves, in gray shirts with the sleeves rolled up to show their big, sun-freckled biceps. They wore blocky work shoes. Tangles of oily hair fell over their brows. In the last fading light of the day, all of this began to seem like a malign dream. Blood ran in his open eye. The knapsack was torn from his back. Blows rained down on him, and he became a boneless, jittering puppet on a fraying string. Consciousness would not quite desert him. The only sounds were their out-of-breath gasps as they pistoned their fist into him, and the liquid twitter of a nightjar in the deep stand of pine close by. School Ring had staggered to his feet. "Hold him," he said. "Hold him by the hair. Hands grasped his arms. Somebody else twined both hands into Nick's springy black hair. "Why don't he yell out?" one of the others asked, agitated. "Why don't he yell out, Ray? I told you not to use any names," Signet Ring said. "I don't give a fuck why he don't yell out. I'm gonna mess him up. Sucker kicked me. Goddamn dirty fighter. That's what he is." A fist looped down. Nick jerked his head aside, and the ring furrowed his cheek. "Hold him, I told you," Ray said. "What are y'all, bunch of pussies?" The fist looped down again, and Nick's nose became a squashed and dripping tomato. His breath clogged to a snuffle. Consciousness was down to a narrow pencil beam. His mouth dropped open, and he scooped in night air. The nightjar sang again, sweet and soulless. Nick heard it this time no more than he had the last. "Hold him," Ray said. "Hold him, goddammit!" The fist looped down. 2 of his front teeth shattered as the school ring snowplowed through them. It was an agony he couldn't scream about. His legs unhinged and he sagged, held like a grain sack now by the hands behind him. Ray, that's enough. You want to kill him? Hold him! Sucker kicked me. I'm going to mess him up. Then lights were splashing down the road, which were bordered here by underbrush and interlaced with huge old pines. Ah, Jesus. Dump him, dump him. That was Ray's voice, but Ray was no longer in front of him. Nick was dimly grateful, but most of what little consciousness he had left was taken up by the agony in his mouth. He could taste flecks of his teeth on his tongue. Hands pushed him, propelling him out into the center of the road. Oncoming circles of light pinned him like an actor on the stage. Rick screamed. Nick pinwheeled his arms and tried to make his legs go, but his legs wouldn't oblige. They had given him up for dead. He collapsed on the composition surface, and the screaming sound of brakes and tires filled the world as he waited numbly to be run over. At least, it would put an end to the pain in his mouth. Then a splatter of pebbles struck his cheeks, and he was looking at the tire, which had come to a stop less than a foot from his face. He could see a small white rock embedded between two of the treads, like a coin held between a pair of knuckles. Piece of quartz, he thought disjointedly, and passed out. When Nick came to, he was lying on a bunk. It was a hard one, but in the last 3 years or so, he had lain on harder. He struggled his eyes open with great effort. They seemed gummed shut, and the right one, the one that had been hit by the runaway moon, would only come to half-mast. He was looking at the cracked gray cement ceiling, pipes wrapped in insulated zigzag beneath it. A large beetle was trudging busily along one of these pipes. Bisecting his field of vision was a chain. He raised his head slightly, sending a monstrous bolt of pain through it, and saw another chain running from the outside foot of the bunk to the bolt in the wall. He turned his head to the left, another bolt of pain, this one not so killing, and saw a rough concrete wall. Cracks ran through it. It had been extensively written on. Some of the writing was new, some old, most illiterate. This place has bugs, lousy dragon, Louis Draginsky, 1987. I like it in my asshole. DTS can be fun. George Rambling is a jerk-off. I still love you, Suzanne. This place sucks. Jerry. Clyde D. Fred, 1981. There were pictures of large, dangling penises, gigantic breasts, crudely drawn vaginas. It all gave Nick a sense of place. He was in a jail cell. Carefully he propped himself on his elbows and let his feet, clad in paper slippers, drop over the edge of the cot, and then swung up to a sitting position. A large economy-sized pain rocked his head again, and his backbone gave out an alarming creak. His stomach rolled alarmingly in his gut, and a fainting kind of nausea seized him. The most dismaying and unmanning kind, the kind that makes you feel like crying out to God to make it stop. Instead of crying out, he couldn't have done that. Nick leaned over his knees, one hand on each cheek, and waited for it to pass. After a while, it did. He could feel the band-aids that had been placed over the furrow on his cheek, and by wrinkling that side of his face a couple of times, he decided that some sawbones had sunk a couple of stitches in there for good measure. He looked around. He was in a small cell shaped like a saltine box, stood on end. Beyond the end of the cot was a barred door. At the head of the cot was a lidless, ringless toilet. Behind and above him, he saw this by craning his stiff neck very, very carefully, was a small barred window. After he had sat on the edge of the cot long enough to feel sure he wasn't going to pass out, he hooked the shapeless gray pajama pants he was wearing down around his knees, squatted on the can, and urinated for what seemed at least an hour. When he was finished, he stood up, holding onto the edge of the cot like an old man. He looked apprehensively into the bowl for signs of blood, but his urine had been clear. He flushed it away. He walked carefully over to the barred door and looked out into a short corridor. To his left was a drunk tank. An old man was lying on one of the 5 bunks. A hand like driftwood dangled on the floor. To the right, the corridor ended in a door that was chalked open. In the center of the corridor was a dangling green shaded light, like the kind he had seen in pool halls. A shadow rose, danced on the propped open door, and then a large man in khaki suntans walked into the corridor. He was wearing a Sam Brown belt and a big pistol. He hooked his thumbs into his pants pockets and looked at Nick for almost a full minute without speaking. Then he said, "When I was a boy, we caught ourselves a mountain lion up in the hills and shot it. Then drug it 20 mile back to town over dirt hardpan. What was left of that creature, when he got home, was the sorriest looking sight I ever saw. You, the second sorriest, boy." Nick thought it had the feel of a prepared speech, carefully honed and treasured, saved for out-of-towners and vags that occupied the barred saltine boxes from time to time. "You got a name, Bubbalua?" Nick put a finger to his swelled and lacerated lips and shook his head. He put a hand over his mouth and then cut the air with it in a soft diagonal hash mark and shook his head again. "What, can't talk? Can't talk? What's this happy horse shit?" The words were amiable enough, but Nick couldn't follow tones or inflections. He plunked an invisible pen from the air and wrote with it. "Want a pencil?" Nick nodded. "If you're mute, how come you don't have none of those cards?" Nick shrugged. He turned out his empty pockets, he balled his fists and shadowboxed the air, which sent another bolt of pain through his head and another wave of nausea through his stomach. He finished by tapping his own temples lightly with his fists, rolling his eyes up and sagging on the bars. Then he pointed to the empty pockets. "You were robbed." Nick nodded. The man in khaki turned away and went back into his office. A moment later he returned with a dull pencil and a notepad. He thrust them through the bars. Written across the top of the note sheet was "Memo from the desk of Sheriff John Baker." Nick turned the pad around and tapped the pencil eraser at the name. He raised questioning eyebrows. "Yeah, that's me. Who are you?" "Nick Andros," he wrote. He put his hand through the bars. Baker shook his head. "I ain't gonna shake with you. You deaf too?" Nick nodded. "What happened to you tonight? Doc Soames and his wife almost ran you down like a woodchuck, boy. Beat up and robbed, a mile or so from a roadhouse on Main Street, Zach's place." "That hangout's no place for a kid like you, Bubbalua. You surely ain't old enough to drink." Nick shook his head indignantly. "I'm 22, he wrote. "I can have a couple of beers without getting beat up and robbed from them, can't I?" Baker read this with a sourly amused look on his face. "It don't appear you can, Shoyo. What are you doing here, kid?" Nick tore the first sheet off the memo pad, crumpled it into a ball, dropped it on the floor. Before he could begin to write his reply, an arm shot through the bars and the steel hand clutched his shoulder. Nick's head jerked up. "My wife neatens these cells," Baker said, "and I don't see any need for you to litter yours up. Go throw that in the John." Nick bent over, wincing at the pain in his neck, and fished the ball of paper off the floor. He took it over to the toilet and tossed it in, and then looked up at Baker with his eyebrows raised. Baker nodded. Nick came back. This time he wrote longer, pencil flying over the paper. Baker reflected that teaching a deaf-mute kid to read and write was probably quite a trick, and this Nick Andros must have some pretty good equipment upstairs to have caught the hang of it. There were fellows here in Shoyo, Kansas, who had never properly caught the hang of it, and more than a few of them hung out in Zach's. But he supposed you couldn't expect a kid who just blew into town to know that. Nick handed the pat through the bars. I've been traveling around, and I'm not a vag. Spent today working for a man named Rich Ellerton, about 6 miles west of here. I cleaned his barn and put up a load of hay in his loft. Last week, I was in Watts, Oklahoma, running fence. The man who beat me up got my week's pay. You sure it was Rich Ellerton you was working for? I can check that, you know. Baker had torn off Nick's explanation, folded it in wallet-sized photo, folded it to a wallet-sized photo, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Nick nodded. You see his dog? Nick nodded. What kind was it? Nick gestured for the pad. Big Doberman, he wrote. But nice, not mean. Baker nodded, turned away, and went back into his office. Nick stood at the bars, watching anxiously. A moment later, Baker returned with a big keyring, unlocked the holding cell, and pushed it back on its track. Come on in the office, Baker said. You want some breakfast? Nick shook his head and then made pouring and drinking motions. Coffee, got that. You take cream and sugar? No. Nick shook his head. Take it like a man, huh? Baker laughed. Come on. Baker started up the hallway, and although he was speaking, Nick was unable to hear what he was saying, with his back turned and his lips hidden. I don't mind the company. I got insomnia. It's got so I can't sleep more'n 3-4 hours most nights. My wife wants me to go see some big shot doctor in the Pine Bluff. If it keeps on, I might just do it. I mean, look at this. Here I am. 5 a.m, not even light out. And there I sit eating eggs and greasy home fries from the truck stop up the road. He turned on the last phrase, and Nick caught truck stop up the road. He raised his eyebrows and shrugged his shoulders to indicate his puzzlement. Don't matter, Baker said. Not to a young kid like you, anyway. In the outer office, Baker poured him a cup of black coffee out of the huge thermos. The sheriff's half-finished breakfast plate stood on his desk blotter, and he pulled it back to himself. Nick sipped the coffee. It hurt his mouth, but it was good. He tapped Baker on the shoulder, and when he looked up, Nick pointed to the coffee, rubbed his stomach, and winked soberly. Baker smiled. You better say it's good. My wife Jane puts it up. He tucked half a hard fried egg into his mouth, chewed, and then pointed at Nick with his fork. You're pretty good. Just like one of those pantomimers. Bet you don't have much trouble making yourself understood, huh? Nick made a seesawing gesture with his hand in midair. Komichi koma. Komase koma. I ain't gonna hold you, Baker said, mopping up grease with a slice of toasted Wonder Bread. But I tell you what, you stick around, maybe we can get the guys who did this to you. You game? Nick nodded and wrote. You think I can get my week's pay back? Not a chance, Baker said flatly. I'm just a hick sheriff boy, or something like that. You'd be one Oral Roberts. Nick nodded and shrugged. Putting his hands together, he made birds fly away. Yeah, like that. How many were there? Nick held up 4 fingers, shrugged, and held up 5. Think you could identify any of them? Nick held up 1 finger and wrote, Big and blonde, your size, maybe a little heavier, gray shirt and pants. He was wearing a big ring. 3rd finger, right hand. Purple stone. That's what cut me. As Baker read this, a change came over his face, first concern and then anger. Nick, thinking the anger was directed against him, became frightened again. Oh, Jesus Christ, Baker said. This here's a full commode slogging over for sure. You sure? Nick nodded reluctantly. Anything else? You see anything else? Nick thought hard and then wrote, small scar on his forehead. Baker looked at the words. That's Ray Booth, he said. My brother-in-law. Thanks, kid. 5 a.m, and my day's wrecked already. Nick's eyes opened a little wider, and he made a cautious gesture of commiseration. Well, all right, Baker said, more to himself than to Nick. He's a bad actor. Janie knows it. He beat her up enough times when they was kids together. Still, they're brother and sister, and I guess I can forget my lovin' for this week. Nick looked down, embarrassed. After a moment, Baker shook his shoulder so that Nick could see him speaking. It probably won't go any good anyway, he said. Ray's and his jerk-off buddies will just swear each other up, your word against theirs. Did you get any licks in? Kicked this Ray guy in the guts, Nick wrote. Got another in the nose. Might have broken it. Ray chums around with Vince Hogan, Billy Warner, and Mike Childress mostly, Baker said. I might be able to get Vince alone and break him down. He's got all the spine of a dying jellyfish. If I could get him, I could go after Mike and Billy. Ray got that ring in the fraternity at LSU. He flunked out his sophomore year. He paused, drumming his fingers against the rim of his breakfast plate. I guess we could give it a go, kid, if you want to. But I'll warn you in advance, we probably won't get 'em. They're as vicious and cowardly as a dog pack, but they're town boys, and you're just a deaf-mute drifter. And if they got off, they'd come after you. Nick thought about it. In his mind, he kept coming back to the image of himself, being shoved from one of them to the next, like a bleeding scarecrow. Into Ray's lips, forming the words, I'm going to mess him up. Sucker kicked me. To the feel of his knapsack, that old friend in the last 2 wandering years being ripped off from his back. On the memo pad he wrote and underlined 2 words, let's try. Baker sighed and nodded. Okay, Vince Hogan works down to the sawmill. Well, that ain't just true. He does what he does mostly is fuck off down at the sawmill. We'll take a ride down there about 9, if that's fine with you. Maybe we can get him scared enough to spill the beans. Nick nodded. How's your mouth? Doc Sums left some pills. He said it would probably be a misery to you. Nick nodded ruefully. I'll get him. He broke off in Nick's silent movie world. And in Nick's silent movie world, he watched the sheriff explode several sneezes into his handkerchief. That's another one. That's another thing, he went on. But he had turned away now, and Nick caught only the first word. I'm coming down with a real good cold. Jesus Christ, ain't life grand. Welcome to Arkansas, boy. He got the pills and came back to where Nick sat, after he passed them and a glass of water to Nick. Baker rubbed gently under the angle of his jaw. There was a definite, painful swelling there. Swollen glands, coughing, sneezing, low fever, felt like. Yeah, it was shaping up to be a wonderful day. Chapter 10. And I think after this one, I think we'll stop and we'll do 11 tonight. Yeah. I think that'll be all right. Chapter 10. Larry woke up with a hangover that was not too bad, a mouth that tasted as if a baby dragon had used it for a potty chair, and feeling that he was somewhere he shouldn't be. The bed was a single, but there were 2 pillows on it. He could smell frying bacon. He sat up, looked out the windows at another gray New York day, and his first thought was that they had done something horrible to Berkeley overnight. Turned it dirty and sooty. Had aged it. Then last night began coming back, and he realized he was looking at Fordham, not Berkeley. He was on the second floor flat on Tremont Avenue. Not far. She's gonna stare at the window. Not far from the concourse, and his mother was going to wonder where he had been last night. Had he called her, given her any of a kind of excuse, no matter how thin? He swung his legs out of bed and found a crumpled pack of Winstons with one crazy cigarette left in it. He lit it with a green plastic Bic lighter. It tasted like dead horse shit. Out in the kitchen, the sound of frying bacon went on, like radio static. The girl's name was Maria, and she had said he was, oral hygienist? Oh, she was. Oral hygienist, was that it? Larry didn't know how much she knew about hygiene, but she was great on oral. He vaguely remembered being globbled like a Purdue drumstick. Crosby, Stills, and Nash on the crappy little stereo in the living room, singing about how much water had gone underneath the bridge, time we had wasted on the way. If this memory was correct, Maria sure hadn't wasted and much time. She was just a little overwhelmed he to discover he was that Larry Underwood. At one point in the evening's festivities, hadn't they gone out reeling around looking for a open record store so they could buy a copy of Baby Can You Dig Your Man? He groaned very softly and tried to retrace yesterday from its innocuous beginnings to its frantic, gobbling finale. The Yankees weren't in town. He remembered that. His mother had been gone to work when he woke up, and she had left a Yankee schedule on the kitchen table, along with a note. Larry, as you can see, the Yankees won't be back until July 1st. They are playing a doubleheader, the 4th of July. You're not doing anything that day. Why not take your mom to the ballpark? I'll buy the beer and hot dogs. There are eggs and sausage in the fridge, and sweet rolls in the bread box, if you like them better. Take care of yourself, kiddo. There was a typical Alice Underwood P.S. Most of the kids you hang around with are gone now, and good riddance to a bunch of hoods. But I think Buddy Marks is working at the print shop on Stricker Avenue. Just thinking of that note was enough to make him wince. No dear before his name. No love before her signature. She didn't believe in phony stuff. The real stuff was in the refrigerator. Sometime while he had been sleeping off his drive across America, she had gone out and stocked up on every goddamn thing in the world that he liked. Her memory was so perfect it was frightening. A daisy canned ham, 2 pounds of real butter. How the hell could she afford that on her salary? 2 6-packs of Coke, deli sausages, a roast of beef, already marinating in Alice's secret sauce, the contents of which she refused to divulge even to her son, and a gallon of Baskin-Robbins Peach Delight ice cream in the freezer, along with a Sara Lee cheesecake, the kind with strawberries on top. It's are good. On impulse, he had gone into the bathroom, not just to take care of his bladder, but to check the medicine cabinet. A brand new Pepsodent toothbrush was hanging in the old holder, where all of his childhood toothbrushes had hung, one after another. There was a package of disposable razors in the cabinet, a can of Bristol Barbasol shave cream, even a bottle of Old Spice cologne. Not fancy, she would have said. Larry could actually hear her, but smelly enough for the money. He had stood looking at these things, then had taken the new tube of toothpaste out and held it in his hand. No dear, no love, Mom. Just a new toothbrush, a new tube of toothpaste, a new bottle of cologne. Sometimes, he thought, real love is silent as well as blind. He began brushing his teeth, wondering if there might not be a song in that someplace. The oral hygienist came in, wearing a pink nylon half slip and nothing else. Hi, Larry, she said. She was short, pretty in the vague Sandra D sort of way, and her breasts pointed at him, perkily, without a sign of sag. What was the old joke? That's right, Luke. She has a pair of 38s and a real gun. Huh, very funny. He had come 3,000 miles to spend the night being eaten alive by Sandra D. Hi, he said, and got up. He was naked, but his clothes were at the foot of the bed. He began to put them on. I got a robe you can wear if you want to. We're having kippers and bacon. Kippers and bacon? His stomach began to shrivel and fold in on itself. No, honey, I've got to run. Some things I got to see. Oh, hey, you can't run out on me like that. Really? It's important. Well, I'm important, too. She was becoming strident. It hurt Larry's head. For no particular reason, he thought of Fred Flintstone bellowing, Wilma! At the top of his cartoon lungs. Your Bronx is showing, love, he said. What's that supposed to mean? She planted her hands on her hips, a greasy spatula sticking out of one closed fist like a steel flower. Her breast jiggled fetchingly, but Larry wasn't fetched. He stepped into his pants and buttoned them. So I'm from the Bronx. Does that make me black? What have you got against the Bronx? What are you, some kind of racist? Nothing, and I don't think so, he said, and walked over to her in his bare feet. Listen, that somebody the somebody I have to meet is my mother. I just got into town 2 days ago, and I didn't call her last night or anything, did I? He added hopefully. You didn't call anybody, she said sullenly. I just bet it's your mother. He walked back to the bed and stuck his feet in his loafers. It is, really. She works at the chemical banks building. The chemical bank building. She's a housekeeper. Well, these days I guess she's a floor supervisor. I bet you aren't that Larry Underwood that has that record either. You believe what you want. I have to run. You cheap prick, she flashed at him. What am I supposed to do with all this stuff I cooked? Throw it out the window, he suggested. She uttered a high squawk of anger and hurled the spatula at him. On any other day of his life, it would have missed. One of the first laws of physics was, to wit, a spatula will not fly a straight trajectory if hurled by an angry oral hygienist. Only this was the exception that proved the rule. Flip flop up and over, smash right into Larry's forehead. It didn't hurt much. Then he saw 2 drops of blood fall on the throw rug as he bent over to pick the spatula up. He advanced 2 steps with the spatula in his hand. I ought to powder you with this, he shouted at her. Sure, she said, cringing back and starting to cry. Why not, big star? Fucking run. I thought you were a nice guy. You ain't no nice guy. Several tears ran down her cheeks, dropped from her jaw, and plopped onto her upper chest. Fascinated, he watched one of them roll down the slope of her right breast and perch on the nipple. It had a magnifying effect. He could see pores and one black hair sprouting from the inner edge of her areola. Jesus Christ, I'm going crazy, he thought wonderingly. I have to go, he said. His white cloth jacket was at the foot of the bed. He picked it up and slung it over his shoulder. You ain't no nice guy, she cried at him as he went into the living room. I only went with you because I thought you were a nice guy. The sight of the living room made him feel like groaning. On the couch where he dimly remembered being gobbled were at least 2 copies of Baby Can You Dig Your Man. 3 more were on the turntable of the dusty portable stereo. On the far wall was a huge poster of Ryan O'Neal and Amy McGraw. Being gobbled means never having to say you're sorry. Jesus, I'm going crazy. She stood in the bedroom doorway, still crying, pathetic in her half-slip. He had to see a nick on one of her shins. He could see a nick on one of her shins where she had cut herself shaving. Listen, give me a call, she said. I ain't mad. He should have said, sure, and that would have been the end of it. Instead, he heard his mouth utter a crazy laugh and then, your kippers are burning. She screamed at him and started across the room, only to trip over a throw pillow on the floor and go sprawling. One of her arms knocked over a half-empty bottle of milk and rocked the empty bottle of scotch standing next to it. Holy God, Larry thought. Were we mixing those? He got out quickly and pounded down the stairs. As he went down the last 6 steps of the front door, he heard her in the upper hall yelling down, You ain't no nice guy, you ain't no... He slammed the door behind him, and misty, humid warmth washed over him, carrying the aroma of spring trees and automobile exhaust. It was perfume after the smell of frying grease and stale cigarette smoke. He still had the crazy cigarette, now burned down to the filter, and he threw it into the gutter and took a deep breath of fresh air. Wonderful to be out of that craziness. Return with us, not to those wonderful days of normalcy as we... Above him, behind him, a window went up with a rattling bang, and he knew it was coming next. I hope you rot, she screamed down at him. The complete Bronx fishwife. I hope you fall in front of some fucking subway train. You ain't no singer. You're shitty in bed, you louse. Pound this up your ass. Take this to your mother, you louse. The milk bottle came zipping down from the second floor bedroom window. Larry ducked. It went off into the gutter like a bomb, spraying the street with glass fragments. The scotch bottle came next, twirling end over end to crash nearly at his feet. Whatever else she had, her aim was terrifying. He broke into a run, holding holding one arm over his head. This madness was never going to end. From behind him came a final long brain cry, triumphant with juicy Bronx intonation. Kiss my ass, you cheap bastard! Then he was around the corner and on the expressway overpass, leaning over, laughing with a shaky intensity that was nearly hysteria, watching the cars pass below. Couldn't you have handled that better? He said, totally unaware he was speaking out loud. Oh, man, you could have done better than that. That was a bad scene. Crap on that, man. He realized he was speaking aloud, and another burst of laughter escaped him. He suddenly felt a dizzy, spinning nausea in his stomach and squeezed his eyes tightly closed. A memory circuit in the Department of Masochism clicked open, and he heard Wayne Stuckey saying, "There's something in you that's like biting on tinfoil." He had treated the girl like an old horror on the morning after the frat house gangbang. You ain't no nice guy. I am. But when the people of the big party had protested his decision to cut them off, he had threatened to call the police. And he had meant it. Hadn't he? Yes. Yes, he had. Most of them were strangers, true. He could care if they crapped in a landmine, but crapped on a landmine. But 4 or 5 of the protesters had gone back to the old days. And Wayne Stuckey, that bastard, standing in the doorway with his arms folded like a hanging judge on that day, on the big day. Sal Doria going out saying, "If this was what it does to guys like you, Larry, I wish you were still playing sessions." He opened his eyes and turned away from the overpass, looking for a cab. Oh, sure. The outraged friend bit. If Sal was such a big friend, what was he doing there sucking off him in the first place? I was stupid, and nobody likes to see a stupid wise guy. Stupid guy wise up. That's the real story. You ain't no nice guy. I am a nice guy, he said sulkily. Sulkily. And whose business is it anyway? A cab was coming, and Larry flagged it. It seemed to hesitate a moment before pulling up to the curb, and Larry remembered the blood on his forehead. He opened the back door and climbed in before the guy could change his mind. Manhattan, the Chemical Bank building on Park, he said. The cab pulled out into traffic. You got a cut on your forehead, guy, the cabbie said. A girl threw a spatula at me, Larry said absently. The cabbie offered him a strange, false smile of commiseration and drove on, leaving Larry to settle back and try to imagine how he was going to explain this night out to his mother. All right, let's stop there. I don't know where my bookmark went, so I'm going to use this receipt. We did 5 chapters today, so like this morning, we did really good. I think that will be enough for now, and then I can get a few things done that I need to get done, and then tonight we will start with 11. I think we did good. I think we did really good. I do. So, I mean, I could read all day, but I have some stuff I need to do, and I can't just up and move. So, we are going to go ahead and stop for now. I appreciate y'all. I really do. I love y'all. Y'all are just the best. If y'all want, follow me. Then you'll know when I'm going to read. There's the Discord if you want to join that. I should be reading around 7 tonight. So I am going to put that in there so that there's a schedule. And you know what? I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a schedule. If I can find the schedule thing. Yeah, I'm going to start scheduling so that I can have some kind of at least like, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I'm going to start scheduling. Like tonight, we are definitely going to do 7 o'clock. So I think that'll be good. So yeah, I'm going to set that up right now while I'm talking to you guys. You can 7 p.m. Here we go. And enter, and we're good to go. So yeah. All right, I'm going to go put that in the schedule for tonight, and I'm going to try to do that from now on. I'm going to work on that. So I will see you guys later. I want to thank you for being with me. I really appreciate y'all. Follow me if you want. I will be back at 7 o'clock tonight, and we will read starting at chapter 11. All right? I love y'all. Thank you so, so much. And we will see you soon. Bye.